Okay, so we want to say hello and welcome to this seminar. We hope a really helpful and important seminar. Hopefully you've enjoyed Maycamp so far. You've been checking into the things that have been going on. Loads for you to check out. If you've missed anything,
Okay, so
don't worry,
we want
you
to
can
say
go back
hello and welcome
and
to this
deal with
seminar.
that. Sorry, just deal with a slight sound issue there. But you're welcome to go back and look over anything you've missed. And there's more stuff still to come over the weekend. Don't know about you, but with the weather we've had today, I'm kind of glad we're not camping, but we do very much miss being there with you at Maycamp, but glad that we can connect in this way. So we're looking this afternoon at the subject of mental health and how we look after our mental health. And obviously it's a huge subject that we want to reflect on and focus on. Just to say right at the beginning, you can see just at the bottom of the video here that there is a phone number. If you've got any questions related to how you look after your mental health, then if you text them to that number, then they'll come through to us and we will be able to hopefully answer some of those questions at the end of the session or as we go through the session. So any questions about mental health, how you look after your mental health particularly, then please do text them through and we'll do what we can to answer those. So we want to say right at the very beginning that it's really important that we talk about mental health. We know that there is a lot of shame around this subject. There's a lot of issues that people have with it. But we want to say right at the start of this that it's okay to talk about mental ill health. And what our hope and our prayer from this session is that by the end of this session, if you are somebody who is struggling with your mental health, maybe with depression or anxiety or loneliness or whatever it may be, and you're suffering with that alone or you're going through that alone, that at the end of this hour, you will make the decision to reach out to somebody to ask for help, because that is such an important step in your journey to recovery. So we're going to be talking about that using a story of example of Elijah, a little bit of Lindsay's story as well, and in the hope that that's going to help you. We'll also be covering kind of mental health during lockdown, because we are living in uncertain times and that can affect our mental health and how we deal with our mental health and how we look after our mental health. And we also want to say that this seminar isn't just for those people who have depression or anxiety or mental ill health, because looking after our mental health is important for all of us. And it's important that we always find ways to look after our mental health. So there's a couple of ways you can get in touch with the number at the bottom, or you can just write a comment in the YouTube feed that is below your YouTube video now. If you've got any questions, send them through to us. Hopefully we'll see them. And we want to start in the Bible. We want to start with the example of somebody in the Bible who had issues with mental ill health and particularly depression. And so Linz is going to tell us now about Elijah.
King Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how Elijah had killed all the prophets with a sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "May the gods punish me terribly if by this time tomorrow I don't kill you, just as you killed those prophets." When Elijah heard this, he was afraid and ran for his life, taking his servant with him. When they came to Beersheba in Judah, Elijah left his servant there. Then Elijah walked for a whole day into the desert. He sat down under a bush and asked to die. "I have had enough, Lord," he prayed. "Let me die. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the tree and slept. Suddenly an angel came to him and touched him. "Get up and eat," the angel said. Elijah saw near his head a loaf baked over coals and a jar of water, so he ate and drank. Then he went back to sleep. Later, the Lord's angel came to him a second time. The angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat. If you don't, the journey will be too hard for you." So Elijah got up and ate and drank. The food made him strong enough to walk for 40 days and nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. There, Elijah went into a cave and stayed all night. Then the Lord spoke his word to him. "Elijah, why are you here?" He answered, "Lord God, all-powerful, I have always served you as well as I could, but the people of Israel have broken their agreement with you, destroyed your altars and killed your prophets with swords. I am the only prophet left, and now they're trying to kill me too. The Lord said to Elijah, go stand in front of me on the mountain, and I will pass by you. Then a very strong wind blew until it caused the mountains to fall apart and large rocks to break in front of the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire, there was a quiet, gentle sound. When Elijah heard it, he covered his face with his coat and went out and stood at the entrance to the cave. So I really like the story of Elijah because it reminds me that I am not the first person to deal with depression or anxiety or to believe lies from the enemy. And I think that really gives us some sort of confidence to know that this goes way back into biblical times. And I really like the part of the story where we see that God's not in the wind, he's not in the earthquakes, he's not in the fire, but he's in that gentle whisper. God isn't screaming and shouting at us, he's just gently calling us to come out from where we are into an experience, into an encounter with him. I also really like that God meets Elijah's needs. He doesn't just go, here is the solution, this is what you need to do, but he goes, yeah, are you eating? Are you sleeping? Are you resting? Because you need to do those things in order to be able to come out from the place that you're currently in.
So it's really a really good practical story if you want to find it yourself. It's in 1 Kings 19 if you want to read it again later. But it just shows the humanity of Elijah. This is a mighty prophet. You may know the story of Elijah. He's seen God do incredible things, absolutely amazing things. Even through him and with him, he's a prophet who can hear the voice of God. But you find him in this moment in his absolute raw humanity, really struggling. But the biggest thing about the story of Elijah is that in this moment, in that scene that Lynn's just read to us, he's facing this on his own. He's gone into solitude. He's gone away from everybody else. And as a result of being on his own, he's not necessarily seeing things for how they really are. So he's saying that everybody's trying to kill him, but that's a huge exaggeration, a lie of the enemy. And then he's got loads, he's the sense saying, I'm the only prophet left, which also wasn't the truth. But later we know that Elijah reaches out to God and reaches out to others. And so that's what we want this session mainly to be about, not only to be about the importance of finding help from others if you're suffering from mental ill health of any kind. So Lynn's just going to share just a bit of her story about how reaching out to others really helped her in a difficult time a few years back.
So I think the part of my story that is probably most helpful to share is that I think I've always struggled with low self-esteem and low confidence. And then we had children, and I started to get quite depressed. I think my mood was very low, and just a really strong sense of not being good enough anymore, not being good enough caring for this baby, not being a good enough friend or human being. And I started to get quite depressed, and I felt like life was quite out of control. And so I looked for ways that I could claw back some control. And for me, that looked like being very controlled about what I ate in some parts. So during the day, I would be quite restrictive with what I would eat. And then in the evening, I would have a binge. So I would restrict all day and then I would binge in the evening. And then to compensate that, I began to exercise and I started to do a lot of exercise. And then I found ways of purging the food, which I was binging on. So restrictive, binging, over-exercising, purging. And that cycle just was a downward one. So I became more depressed. and more of a sense of not being good enough, um, because I didn't think that I was even doing those things particularly well, which is ridiculous. And then I started to withdraw from people, because I didn't want them to see what I was doing. So life became quite lonely. I spent large amounts of time at home, with young children while Carl was studying at college to become a vicar. And it just all sort of fed into not being able to cope on my own. So I held on to this area of food and exercise, this little bubble that I could control, and everything else sort of died, I suppose, around it. So I didn't really have many friends. I didn't go out anywhere apart from to exercise. And I think I started to believe the lies more and more that were playing in my head, that, I had to keep this a secret. I couldn't talk to Carl about it because he would be really, well, he'd be cross and he'd be angry and he might judge me and he wouldn't really understand. So there wasn't really any point in talking to Carl about it. And I didn't really want to talk to friends that I had about it because I didn't want them to judge me, or I didn't want people trying to give me advice or tips and solutions. So yeah, it was all just keep it in to myself. And then if you keep it into yourself like that, then it all doesn't seem quite as big as it does when you then say it out loud. So I could pretend that really it wasn't a big deal. I wasn't harming anybody apart from myself. And for a while, that worked quite well.
Mhm. But not forever, because I think myself and others did start to notice and start to realise that there was something going on with Linz, and we didn't judge her in any way for that. But there was a real significant turning point for Linz, when she did make that decision to reach out to a couple of friends who she was meeting with as a prayer triplet, I think you know.
Yeah, so I think one of the only sort of friendships that I managed to keep hold of was my little prayer triplet. Two good friends that we met while we were at college. So I didn't know them that well, but because we had been meeting sort of weekly, we had sort of built up a level of trust, and I knew that I could talk to them about things and they wouldn't go blabbing my news to everybody. So one day I sort of tested the water with them, and I kind of said, this is what I'm doing at home. That's all right, isn't it? And I was actually a little bit taken aback by their response that actually what I was doing was not very healthy, and it wasn't good for my relationship with Carl, because there was this massive thing that was sitting in between the middle of us that I wasn't able to share with Carl. And they were quite blunt with me, which I think when you have good friends like that who can see you at your worst and then challenge you, I think that's a really good thing to have. They said to me that if I didn't tell Carl what was going on, that they would. That's the sign of a good friend there.
Yeah. And so that is what happened. Linz did then open up, and we then sought further help. So Linz then went to a GP, which long term led to counselling and other help as well. Ended up with antidepressants as well for a season.
Yeah. And I think antidepressants is one of those things that, as a Christian, you can often think, oh, I shouldn't need to go on antidepressants. I shouldn't need to go on any sort of medication because I should be able to have faith strong enough that will get me out of this, faith alone. And if I have to use medication, if that's what is needed, then it's almost sort of, I'm not a good enough Christian. My faith isn't strong enough because I've had to use medication to help me out of this. And I read somewhere that medication is a bit like wearing a life jacket and going overboard on a boat. Because you've got the life jacket on, it means you're not going to go under the water and drown. So medication is a thing that just lifts you enough to be able to go, right, now that I can actually see above the waves, what is it that I need to do from this place, rather than feeling like you're sinking and sinking and not able to pull yourself up or pray yourself out of it. Or even depression can make you completely lose sight of God, and where is God in all of this? And just having that medication under you for a little bit can sort of lift you just enough that you can go, I can see.
Mm. And then there's lots of other things then that go with that. So we know that medication doesn't work for everybody. For Linz, it certainly was something that was very helpful, something that she was able to use to do that, to lift her head enough to be able to then receive the help from other people as well, from the counselling, from friendships, from me, from other people around us. And so that sharing was not the total of Lindsay's healing or anything like that, but it certainly was a really significant step in the journey to recovery, because first of all, it was admitting that she needed help, and then going on to get that help was a huge thing as well. And since then, it's been a huge journey. It's not about being totally healed. We've got a delivery there, but it's not about being totally healed instantly overnight. It is a huge journey that we're still on, with going through this issue of mental health. And so, what we want from this session, having just kind of shared a little bit about Lindsay's story, is to then say, well, what has helped then when things have been bad, when depression has been there, and we've recognized it as depression, maybe we've had some treatment, maybe we've had medication or whatever it is we need. What are the things on a daily basis that help us? But also thinking about that in the current context that we're living in now, with COVID-19 and isolation and all those kind of things that are playing a part, to reflect a little bit about how we look after our mental health normally, but also during this particular time. So I know Lynn's got some thoughts on that particularly.
So I think that looking after mental health will look very different now to how it might have looked 3 months ago. So for me, 3 months ago, I was having weekly counselling sessions, face to face, not through a computer. And I had put in some sort of coping strategies, I suppose, is the best name for them. So I was able to go to the gym to do some sensible exercise. I enjoyed going to coffee shops with a book and enjoying a nice latte. I also enjoyed going for a wander around the charity shops. And then if you fast forward to now, I can't do those things. So there was a little bit of a bump around the time that lockdown started for us, I think. Counselling for me had to go through Zoom. I do not enjoy Zoom, so that was very difficult. But I pushed myself to do that. What else has changed during lockdown? We had a period at the beginning of lockdown where Carl was poorly. We don't know what with. Might have been something contagious. So for that reason, we had to all stay indoors for 2 weeks. For me, that is very difficult because I'm not I'm an introvert, so I like being at home and I like quiet and I like alone time. But I do like to be able to go outside for a run or to walk the dog. And with Carl being poorly, I wasn't able to do that. So we were all stuck at home together, which was lovely. But we were all together all the time for 2 weeks. And that was difficult for mental health. And it did give me a bit of a wobble. And so I had to sort of go, okay, well, the things that I had before, the gym and the coffee shops and the charity shops and running with a friend from school, I can't do that right now because I can't leave the house. So what can I do instead? How can I care for my mental health while we can't leave the house at all? So I would try to find quiet spots where I can go and read. I started to have a little bubble bath so I could shut the door on everybody for just 20 minutes. Um, I would try and sit out in the garden because we were blessed, really blessed with sunshine for those 2 weeks. We weren't shut completely in the house. We have a garden. So while Carl was upstairs quarantined in a bedroom and the children were happy playing, I was able to sit outside with a coffee and just be quiet, which I very much enjoyed. And I sort of had to change my thinking. So when I was having counselling, you sort of look at small goals that you can set yourself to achieve rather than looking too far ahead. So I kind of held on to that of going, okay, what is this week going to look like for us? And I wouldn't let myself think too far ahead to what if we're still in this situation 2 months, 3 months down the line? What's that going to be like? Because I think if you let your mind wander that far ahead, that can be quite a dangerous place, and it can feed into anxieties and fears. So for me, I really had to go, okay, we're just going to, today, how do we get through today? The kids are playing up, Carl's upstairs. Have I given him anything to eat today? How am I going to get through today and not want to shut my children away somewhere? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's that one of the key things is to kind of really name when something is new to us, and to recognize actually this is the first time we've been in this situation, and we don't really know what the future's going to look like. So trying to think too far ahead isn't really going to help us very much. So one of the questions was, what's it going to be like afterwards? And the reality is we don't know. And so it's a case of taking each day at a time and not trying to plan too far ahead. There are certain things you can plan for, certain things it's good to be prepared for, but there's so much we don't know about what it's going to look like as we come out of isolation, as we come out of lockdown, what that's going to look like. And I think just like it is now in lockdown, where you've made it this far, it's going to be a case of one day at a time, and sometimes even just 1 hour at a time, just reflecting on what's useful for today and not trying to get too far ahead. And it's also really important, something we discovered quite early on in the lockdown, is about the importance of rationing what you read to protect your mental health. There is so much stuff out there about COVID-19. It's in the news every day. It dominates everything, but to really ration how much of that you read. So I tried to stop reaching for my phone first thing in the morning and going straight to the news website, because for my mental health, I needed to kind of start the day in God's word and in the Bible, and then from that place, then I could then just check one website and just see the latest, and then not fill my day with the news of what's going on. So that for me was one thing that I put in place to help my mental health, protect my mental health during this time. But yeah, I think it really is just a case of taking it really just one day at a time. We don't know yet what the future looks like. We know a God who does, and we're walking with him through the uncertainty. But there are some little things we can do during this time that can really help us. So I don't know if, Lindsay, you want to share some things that have helped, other than not thinking too far ahead, that have really helped in this time.
I think thinking about what you believe is a really important thing, because what we believe shapes who we are. So if you believe that you are worthless, then you will live that out, and you won't care for yourself in the way that you would if you thought you had worth and if you thought you had value. And I found during the seasons of depression that I've walked through, and there have been more than one, that the devil uses it as a very good way to just whisper in some little lies. And sometimes they're sprinkled with a little bit of truth, so you don't quite catch them when they come, but for the most part, they are big fat lies. But because you might find yourself in a low place, they are very easy to swallow on down, those lies. So looking back at Elijah, I think, he believed a lot of lies. He believed that he was the only prophet left, So he had that weight, or he believed he had that weight on his shoulders. He believed that he was alone. So that became sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy for him. He believed he was the only prophet, so he removed himself. So he was alone. So it just fed into that circle, and that's not a good place to find yourself in. What else? I think when you're looking at mental health, it's important to acknowledge it for what it is, rather than try to paint it as not being as bad as it is, which I think is why it's important to reach out to other people, almost as sort of like a way of checking, this is what's going on for me. Is that normal? Is that what I should be walking through right now? And to have someone else go, actually, no, I think, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's try and unpack it a bit. Because I think lies feed and grow in the darkness when we keep them to ourselves, when we live in that secrecy and that shame of whatever might be going on for us. They just grow bigger and bigger. Whereas when you bring them out into the light, where you have somebody else to go, hang on a minute, this is what I'm thinking. Is that right? And for someone else to go, no, that's like way off the mark. And to then unpack that with somebody. And you need to find the right people to do that with. I'm not saying, every person you meet, have a very vulnerable, honest conversation with. But just having one or two people, whether they be friends or a youth leader or a parent, that you feel that you're able to talk to, and even say to them, I don't want you to give me solutions to this. I just want to be able to talk and work things out for myself, which I always find much easier when I start talking or when I start writing. I find that it helps to kind of untangle the mess of words that are in my brain. I find it much easier to start writing it down or speaking it out, and then you kind of work out where you're going. And if you've got somebody interrupting you, or that can be quite difficult, so you just kind of need to say to people, I just need to talk, and I'll let you know when I finish talking. And then if you've got any thoughts, then either I'd like to hear them then, or I don't want to hear them then.
Yeah, and I think that's just a really important thing in terms of, so maybe you're watching this and you support somebody who struggles with mental ill health. It's a journey that we are on, and I very rarely get it wrong. But that whole concept of just listening and just sitting with Linz in her pain or in the depression that she's going through, and not having the answers, not rushing to have the answers or quote scriptures or whatever it may be, but just to listen and just to understand. Because when somebody is opening up like that, they're being incredibly vulnerable. And we are both believers that vulnerability is a strength and not a weakness. But our society tends to say that it's a weakness. And so if you are feeling like you don't want to share because it means being very vulnerable, we understand that, because you've got to be actually quite a strong person to share with somebody else what's really going on. And you need to have enough level of trust with that person to be able to do that. But yeah, that reaching out to somebody, we're going to keep emphasizing it, and we'll again at the end as well, is really important, especially during this time. And although it's really hard, you can't meet up with someone for a coffee in the way you might do, but still it is possible to reach out to people close to you. But there's some other things that we can do that help us just in terms of our mindset and in terms of what we focus on, and what can help us to see the absolute truth rather than the lies that mental health might lead us to believe.
So I think when you're struggling with your mental health a little bit, you can often feel like, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. And that's a lot of pressure to put yourself under. So I think it's important to just sort of take a step back and kind of think, what is it that I can manage today? Because that's enough. God isn't saying, well, really, you should be praying for an hour a day, and then you should be reading the Bible for an hour a day, and then you should do a Bible study, and then you should be worshiping. And if you're not doing all of those things, then really, you're rubbish. So I think some of the things that we can do that are quite easy to do, I think, are we need to be feeding our minds with some biblical truths. So that can just be sort of looking through the Bible, looking for some promises. You'll know where there are good promises in the Bible.
Well, I mean, there are lots, because there's actually over 300 promises in the Bible, and God's never broken any of them. So even if you just did a Google search of promises of God in the Bible, you would be surprised at some of those amazing promises that are made to us as his children. Because he's a promise maker and promise keeper. So just a quick Google search and you'll find loads of really encouraging things that are just absolute truths that just remind us of who God is and who we are in relation to him.
Yeah, and I think it's good to look for truths about who God says that we are, because those lies will creep in, and you will hear things like you're worthless, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're a waste of space, you're a disappointment. And then if you hold that up to what the Bible says about you, you have to make a choice, and you have to kind of say, well, are these things that I'm hearing in my head, are these what's true? Or is what I'm reading here, this stuff that God said about me, is this what's true? And then it is a choice, which one am I going to try and listen to? And I know that sounds like, oh, that's really easy to do, and I know it isn't. But I think the more you get into a practice of going, actually, God says this about me. And I want to believe that's true. I think that's the first step. If you're not able to say, I believe that's true straight away, to want to believe something, I think is a good first step to take. We also need to free our minds from destructive thought patterns. And again, that's easier said than done. And something that I worked a lot on when I was doing my counselling. And the way we sort of viewed it was like having a little parrot on my shoulder, which would kind of whisper these things about me. And my counsellor kind of said to me, how would you like to shut that parrot up? And I am quite a gentle person. So I kind of took it as I was just going to grab the beak. Just be like, no, you don't get to speak right now, parrot, not Carl. You're trying to whisper this thing about me, about how I'm not good enough. What? No, you don't. I'm not going to listen to that, because that's not what God says about me. So freeing our minds from destructive thoughts. And we need to just try and focus on Jesus. And for me, the easiest way that I find to do this, and you'll have different ways of doing this, but I enjoy just listening to a little bit of worship music. So, taking yourself off, just putting on a favorite track and just listening to those words and letting those words soak over you. And I think those three things, if you are struggling, that is enough, and that's good enough. I think we often think that if we're not achieving this standard of something, then we're failing, we're falling short. And I think sometimes good enough is enough.
The whole kind of not striving for perfectionism, or saying, I have to have it all sorted now. There is no quick fix when our mental health is struggling. It's about falling into really good kind of daily habits and practices. I don't know, scientifically speaking, it's impossible to break a habit. The only thing you can do is replace it with a better one. And it's good to have good habits, things that really help us. And it is a journey. It takes a while. You can't just find a fix overnight. God is a God of miracles and can bring miraculous healing, but often with mental health, it's about us making daily decisions to not strive for that perfectionism, and to be on that journey of good enough, because in God's eyes you are more than enough. You are perfect because of what he's done for you on the cross, and nothing can take that away, especially not your emotions. And so that's one of those things of just that we don't try to strive to be something that we're not. If we're really struggling, either with our friends or with ourselves, that we're honest and open about that.
So I think there are things that we need to replace with something else. So I think when we are struggling, we have that human thing in us that says, withdraw, retreat, protect yourself, and you'll be all right. But I think what we need to do is swap that for some form of communication. And you might not be in a place where you're ready to give people the whole picture. So it might just be that trusted friend where you're able to just say, at the moment, I'm struggling. I can't talk about it right now, but I just need you to know that I'm struggling. And when I'm ready to talk about it, will you be there? Will you be there for me? So withdrawal for communication. This thing about perfectionism and having to be perfect at something, having to be the perfect at my Bible study and having to be the perfect friend to everybody. And, I think we need to swap that for just being good enough. So for us, there are days when the fact that all of our children have been fed and have had a drink and have not spent all day watching TV, that is a win some days, especially homeschooling. That's we've made it through the day and everyone's done a little bit of something. That's enough. That's good enough. We may not be crafting and creating or learning a new hobby or learning how to make an instrument out of something we found out in the garden. There are people doing that, but we're not. And that's fine. That's enough. I realize that is not our skill set. And I'm not going to live in that world of comparing myself to what I see on a screen of somebody else's reality. You can beat yourself up with that. But I think accepting that good enough is enough works for us. And I think we need to swap hiding those feelings away, living in that secrecy and that shame, and swapping that for being open with somebody, at least with yourself, I think, because you've got the little parrot or whatever it is on your shoulder whispering the lies. And that's very easy to feed into that and tell yourself, it's not as bad. If you tell people, then, well, that's just attention seeking and you're making a big deal out of nothing. But I think when you're honest with yourself and you go, actually, I'm not in a great place, that's the starting place for moving forward, I think. So I think just going back to those, what small things can we be doing? I think we have a daily choice of, can we lean on God rather than trying to do it all in our own strength? And that's something that I still am not very good at, because I try and go, I can fix myself. I can get myself out of there. My mood's a bit low, but I can pick myself up. So leaning on God, I think, and going back to focusing on Jesus, I think we need to ask ourselves, are we looking at Jesus, or are we so consumed by the circumstances in front of us that we've lost sight of Jesus, and the thing that we are facing, whatever that is too much and it blocks Jesus out outside. And what is it that maybe God is trying to teach us? I was thinking about God teaching us things when we're in a storm, and struggling with your mental health can feel like you're in a bit of a storm. And then this afternoon we had a massive thunder, lightning storm. And I think God used that for me. And he kind of said, it's pouring down with rain out there. There's thunder and there's lightning. You've got a choice. You can try and go and hang around in the garden like you were yesterday in the sunshine. You can try and take your cup of coffee out and sit in the garden like you did yesterday. You can try and hang your washing out to dry in the downpour, but you're not going to be very successful. And he reminded me that, during a storm, we need to seek shelter.
Mm.
And that's not a sign of weakness, but it's a sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
So the best place for me to be when it's chucking it down with rain and there's thunder and lightning is to be inside this house.
Yeah.
That is the
Mm.
safe place. That's a sensible place to be. It's sensible to be warm and dry rather than trying to carry on as normal out and get completely soaked. And he kind of said, that's just like it is whenever you're having a bit of a storm with your mental health. It's sensible to seek some sort of refuge. And the best place to get that refuge when your mental health is struggling is in God. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually that kind of links to something that we've just had a question on the YouTube comments, saying that one of the things that somebody's found their peers saying is that, oh, actually everybody's struggling, so your struggling doesn't matter. But that importance of not underplaying your storm, not undervaluing your storm and the storm that you're going through, because a lot of people say, oh, we're all in the same boat. The reality is no, we're not. Actually, we're in the same storm, but everybody's boat is different, and everybody's what they're facing, how they're facing that storm, what resources they have to face that storm is different for all of us. And so you can't belittle somebody else's struggle. And the other thing that's really important to say is, obviously there's lots of famous stories of storms in the Bible. One of the most famous is the one on the water where Jesus is asleep in the boat. Now, Jesus, when he came, promised that he would give us a peace beyond understanding. And that peace isn't found in the non-existence of difficult circumstances, but it's found in the presence of Jesus, having Jesus with us in the storm. And so that whole kind of sense of, actually, whatever the storm looks like for you, whatever resources you think you have, when we turn our eyes on Jesus, when we fix our eyes on who we know Jesus to be, not what he's doing, not how he's doing it, but who he is, what the Bible says about who he is and what the Bible says about who we are, then we can find that peace even in the midst of the storm, even right in the middle of the storm. Actually, the eye of the storm is the calmest part of the storm, and that's where we often find Jesus to be. So just to encourage you in that. We've got a couple of questions that we want to answer in a minute, but just to think about those very small things you can do, because obviously they're quite big things we've talked about. A lot of them are practical steps, but very small practical things that Lindsay's found have helped her on a daily basis, particularly during this time of COVID-19, that have helped her daily to look after her mental health.
So I think we found it's really been helpful to kind of set in a little bit of structure to the day, rather than just kind of floating through each day and seeing where it goes. And I don't think that's particularly helpful for keeping an eye on your mental health. So we try and get up at a similar time every day. We try and fit some exercise into the day. We try and get the children involved in that. And we try and eat sensibly. We, kind of set your meals and snack times so that you're not constantly back and forward to the biscuit tin. And I think it's really helpful to kind of set yourself small goals. So whether that be something that you want to achieve that day or something you'd like to achieve in that week, just kind of small little, this week I'd like to start reading a new book, or I'd really like to watch that film. Just small little, I've done that. Tick that off. I think it is really helpful to be able to get outside for a walk, even if it's just to the end of the road and back, just kind of that getting outside, not in a thunderstorm. And it's really useful to be able to focus on what you have achieved rather than what you haven't, no matter how small that is. So for me, little achievements that I get are not overeating, which would be quite easy to do in lockdown. You get a bit bored, so it would be quite easy to go back and forward for me. Or to start a little bit of secret eating. That would be quite a easy one for me to do, but I haven't. And it's quite nice to be able to say to Carl at the end of the day, I didn't. There are cream eggs out in that pantry still. I didn't have one. That's good. So little achievements, and celebrate them, whether they're big. yes, I started running. I've downloaded the 0 to 5K running app, and I got out for my first run.
Mm,
That's something I didn't do yesterday. Yes, me.
mm,
So looking for the things that bring us joy and bring us life. Running may not be for you. Something else that you enjoy doing.
mm,
And I think being thankful is a really good one to
mm,
practice, that attitude of gratitude. So a few years ago, I read the book by Anne Voskamp, who said to kind of write down just 3 things that you're thankful for. And it's something that we try and do at the dinner table with the kids. What are you thankful for today?
mm,
And quite often it'll be silly little things like, I'm thankful for watching Peter Rabbit, or I'm thankful for the cookie that I ate earlier. But actually, it is noticing the small little things and
mm,
being like, I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that the sun came out today,
mm,
or I'm thankful that Carl bought me a cup of tea
mm,
this morning, or I'm thankful for that really nice bit of toast with peanut butter
mm.
and Marmite that I had. Just those little bits that
Mm,
you're able to go, actually, that brought me a little bit of joy.
mm.
Um,
And some recent studies have been done actually to show that it's been scientifically proven now that 21 days of writing down 3 things that you're thankful for actually physically changes your brain and physically changes the way you think. So just really encourage you. And the actual act of writing them down rather than just thinking them internally is a really good thing. So just writing 3 things a day for 21 days and just see kind of what difference that may or may not make. Now, obviously, if you're in really deep dark depression, it can be really hard to find the things to be thankful for. But as Lynn said, they can be the smallest of things, the slightest of things. Just something to be thankful for with that attitude of gratitude. Yeah.
and I think trying to include God somewhere, but not beating yourself up if that feels like it's too much. So when I was very depressed, I felt like God had abandoned me, and kind of left me in this state of complete brokenness, and he
Mm,
just kind of turned his back and well, she's beyond, I can't even fix her, can't even find the words to it, but I just felt like God had gone, I can't do anything with that, so I'm just going to
mm,
leave you there. But I had counselling and things during that time, and went on a kind of recovery type course. um, and they kind of just reminded me that actually God never walks away
mm,
from anybody.
mm,
God is always there, ready and waiting. Like with Elijah, he's just whispering and
mm,
calling our names gently. He's not condemning us because we haven't got it, and he's kind of said, this is it and you're missing it, and when are you just going to get it, you complete moron? But it was me, I had turned my back on God, and I
mm,
kind of was like, I'm in this place of depression, I'm completely broken, and you've not helped me with this, you've
mm,
completely left me to this on my own. So I stopped praying, stopped reading my Bible. I went to church but didn't sing. I just stood up, sat down in the right places.
mm,
And somebody said to me, I kind of used it as a get out free, like, I can't talk to God, can't pray, it's too hard, can't do it.
mm,
And I was challenged on that by somebody, and they said, can you just like arrow prayers? Oh, what? Don't think I'd heard of like arrow prayers before.
mm,
But just those little one line, fire it off to God. God, I'm struggling. Can you help me? Amen.
mm,
And I think that was a little bit of a turning for me, just to be able to go, actually, I can cry out and be like, God, I'm struggling, I'm suffering, and
mm,
you got to show up somewhere, because otherwise this is not going to end well for me.
mm,
Um, and he did. And I think the whole time that I was extremely depressed and not talking to God, I think he was there, right there, just sort of whispering, I'm
mm,
here.
mm,
And when you're ready, you know, like with Elijah, God was like, I'm going to walk past,
mm, Mm.
because you need to come out of the place that you're in, Elijah, and then we need to move on. You're not meant to stay in that little cave hiding and wallowing, but actually if you're willing to take a step, and that can be quite scary to do, but if you're willing to take that step out of that cave and follow me, then I've got you.
Mm. Mm. And we've had some questions come through that we really want to get to, and one of them actually ties in quite well with that one. The whole thing about relapsing, because it's absolutely obviously amazing if you're going through a time of depression and you find a way out of that for a season, and you feel you're in a good place, you feel like everything's great and everything's good, you're seeing the world through much better eyes, you're seeing yourself through much better eyes, or whatever it may be, but then you have a relapse and you perhaps fall into depression again, whatever the trigger of that may have been. And one of the questions is that when you do relapse, sometimes people can just say, "Oh, well, just smile again. Just remember what you knew before." But that's not always easy. I mean, Lynn knows.
No, I had somebody
reality.
say that to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's not hard. And I think even actually at one point, Carl said something very
Sorry,
similar.
yeah.
And if it was that easy, no one would be depressed, would they? Because they just go, "Oh, well, I'll pop on a smile and I'll be all right."
Yeah.
But it is deeper than that, and it's a hard work, and it's a journey, and it's not a case of click your fingers, pop on those pills, and all will be well. It is slow, and it is painful, and quite often you'll find that you will move forward and you'll be like, "Oh, I'm breaking free from this," and then something will happen, something will trigger something, and you'll take a step back and you'll feel like the progress you made was for nothing. And that's when you need to hold on to the truths and who it is that God says you are. And knowing that every time you step back or you feel like you've fallen and what's the point, you've learned something, and you can use that next time something tries to whisper in your ear, or something triggers you, and you can go, "Actually, no, I learned something about this last time. I'm not going to fall for that again this time." Or maybe you will fall for it again. I know I did many times, several times, a lot of times. But you learn to catch it quicker, and it doesn't become destructive for quite as long as it did. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a beautiful song called "Warrior" by Hannah Kerr. Is that?
Yes.
Yes. Which I know that God really spoke to Lynn through that song. That whole kind of thing. Actually, general principle is you fall down, but you get back up stronger. And I know it feels like a bit of a cliche, but actually, it's an incredibly biblical message. That when you see people's relationships with God throughout Scripture, those times when they fall down, actually they do rise. Stronger, because God has taught them something through that pain, through that hurt, through that heartache. And like Lynn said, every time you learn a new coping strategy, you learn something that you can apply next time. You learn to recognize it a lot sooner. And so, that's what we recommend looking at. Maybe we can put a link to that on the YouTube somehow. But it's a really great song to help with mental health. Okay, so some of the questions that have come in, we had one that came in the other day that we want to deal with first. I'll just see if I can find the original question that came through, I think through the Instagram. Somebody who's really, I won't give names obviously for confidentiality, but somebody currently in a psychiatric hospital trying their hardest to hold on to faith, but some of the darker days it's hard to feel God walking beside me. Is there anything I can do to keep my faith?
Yes, I think for me it would be going back to the arrow prayers, just firing off little small prayers, not putting pressure on yourself. That sounds like quite a vulnerable, frightening place to be already, without the added pressure of what I feel I should be doing, what should I be doing. I think the writing down things that you're thankful for, whether you're able to get outside, whether you can be thankful for the smell of grass or the sunshine on your face,
Mm.
whether that be kindness that staff show you, having a good day, having a good session with a counsellor, just writing down those little, actually, this was a positive from today. So when there is a rough day, you're able to look back and be like, actually, look, these are the ways that God showed up for me. This is how I saw God through this staff member. But just being gentle, I think sometimes we don't even need the devil to whisper anything, because we put so much pressure on ourselves that, I should be doing better, I should be getting better, I shouldn't be in this place, I should. And I think just, yeah, be kind to yourself.
Mm. Mm. And I think for absolutely everybody, with or without depression, and in our journey of faith, which is a journey, there's no sort of, we reach this destination that when we maybe have done Alpha, we're a fully qualified Christian. It's not like that. The whole thing is a journey of faith. The journey is like any other relationship. Our relationship with God has good days and bad days, days when we feel close, days when we feel further away. And there are times in our lives where we're literally clinging on by our fingernails. But the reality is we have someone to cling on to. And there are times that actually, when even we feel we can't cling on, that God never lets go of you. And it will feel like he does sometimes when we're trusting our emotions too much, or relying on those things that are feeling like God is close. But actually, it's about knowing that God is close in those times, even if you don't feel it, even if it feels like he's a million miles away. He really is not, because that's just not in his nature. And so that whole kind of thing of just holding on as much as you can and trusting that he holds you. Now, I'm aware that when you are really struggling with depression or anxiety of any kind, that can feel a little bit quib, a bit of a sort of a non-answer. But it's something that you, even when you don't feel it and you don't see it, there will be a time coming when you'll be able to look back and say, actually, yeah, God held me through that. He had me through that. He didn't let go of me through that. And faith, I think, very much because faith isn't about religion, it's about relationship. Therefore, it is a two-way thing. And there are times that when we don't have faith, God has faith in us and has faith on our behalf. And his spirit is always, as it says in Romans, interceding on your behalf. So whenever you pray, even if it's just an arrow prayer, you're joining in with the Spirit who's already praying for you, already interceding for you, already crying out for you. And so you're not facing that alone. And it sounds like for you, the person who sent that question, you're in the right place, hopefully, to get better. And it will be a journey, but God walks with you through that journey every step of the way, even if you don't feel him. He is there. And so maybe find some of those truths, write them on your mirror, write them wherever you can, say them out loud, because actually speaking something out is really important, that we don't just internalize those thoughts, but we really speak them out as well. So speak out those biblical truths of who you know God to be. And we're praying for you since getting the message the other day. Know that others are praying for you as well. It's important to know that you're not walking this alone, as Elijah had to learn that lesson as well. He's not walking this alone. Yeah. We've had some other questions come through. I don't know. Let's see which ones we can try to answer in the time we've got left. What do you do when a friend is doing dangerous and irresponsible things and that you're worried about them because they're struggling with anxiety?
I would try and speak to a youth leader, if you have one, or if there's a teacher at school that you could talk to. I think you need to hold on to the truth that you are not responsible for other people, and people make their own choices. So you can be there and you can listen to somebody, but don't allow yourself to become somebody's secret keeper. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Because if people are doing something that is putting themselves in danger, then you have a responsibility to inform somebody. That may not be their parent, which is why I think a youth worker would probably be the safest kind of first port of call, just to see whether your fears for that person needs some more input.
Yeah, I think it's that whole kind of thing, never promising confidentiality, because if somebody is at risk, you need to be able to reach out to other people so that you're not carrying that burden alone, which can be difficult. If you've already made a promise to keep things confidential, then you maybe need to go back to that person and really try to encourage them to talk to somebody else if they're not already doing so. And almost like Lindsay's friends did, to say, look, if you don't, I'm going to have to, because I think you need support and you need help. But it's not, this is the hardest thing for supporting somebody who's going through mental ill health, is you can't fix them. You can't fix somebody who's struggling with depression. There are counsellors who can help. There are other things. God does an incredible amount and a lot of work, but actually it's not your job to fix your friend or your spouse or whoever's going through mental ill health, but it's just to be with them in it and walk with them through it. So I hope that helps. How do you talk to people in church about depression and anxiety and self-harm as a sufferer? Now that's going to depend very much on the church you go to. We have a huge thing where we are at St Mary's and St Mark's, that we want church to be a place that you can come as you really are, that you can take your mask off and say, look, I'm struggling. And that's a real culture shift, because I think there has historically been so much shame around mental ill health, which thankfully is lifting. It's been Mental Health Awareness Week this week, and there's a lot less shame around it in the nation, but there are still people who just hang on to that shame and don't really know how to deal with people who are struggling with mental ill health. And so I'd say it's not about kind of being really public about it, but just finding a few trusted people. But actually, if you think it's not being talked about in your church, and you have maybe an opportunity to talk to the vicar or your youth worker, I really want to encourage you to encourage them to do a sermon series on depression, or anxiety, or mental health. I think it's really, really important that churches are talking about this as much as possible. If you're a youth worker and you've not yet done the sessions on depression and mental health, can we please encourage you to put it in your program as soon as you're meeting back together? It's really important that we're talking about this stuff as much as we possibly can. And so, yeah, please do encourage that as much as you can. For many churches, it will be a journey. It'll be an uncomfortable journey to go through, because it has been a taboo in the past. But just, the more we can talk about it, the better. But for you as an individual, just find a few trusted people who get it, who understand it, to just share it with. Another one just linked to lockdown, that somebody struggles at being home for too long and find it difficult, and school was your escape and you now no longer have school. How can we cope with being anxious while stuck in the place that makes you anxious? That's tough.
That is tough. And I think, like I had to, I think you need to look for other ways of finding a little bit of peace for yourself, because that school's been taken away, so now there needs to be something else that can kind of step in to that gap, if home is a difficult thing for you. So whether that might be putting into your day, I'm going to go for half an hour's walk on my own, or I'm going to start reading something, or I'm going to try and do some sort of study around, I don't know, anxiety.
Yeah, find a good book that's going to help you. Find something that's just going to help you focus, or almost finding a happy place. I know that sounds really trite. Actually, this morning in the main worship session, we were talking about the importance of, or the good idea of having a prayer space in your home, just a small space that you can sort of retreat from everything else. And so really want to affirm that message from this morning. If you didn't see this morning's meeting, go back and watch it. And just that little bit after the talk about finding a prayer space, somewhere that you can create as your own space. For me, I've got a chair in my study just on my left here. That is my place of retreat. And kids know that if the door's shut, then it's my private space. But if the place that you live in is your place of anxiety, then find your retreat in God's presence. So although it's not a physical place, even if that does mean just going out into the garden if you have one, or just stepping outside for a walk, or whatever it may be, and also just reaching out to friends in whatever way you can. So I think just lastly, somebody sharing that they have an eating disorder that they've had for years. People know, which is fine, because they want people to be aware. But sometimes people like to criticize you for having an eating disorder. Do we have any verses or encouragements generally about that? Lindsay, someone who's had an eating disorder, what's helped you in that
time? I think people will often criticize because they don't fully understand. And they want to say something which they might even believe is helpful, because they don't know what to say, so they just say the first thing that pops into their heads, which is often quite unhelpful. So it's going back to looking for some biblical truths, about who God says we are. Psalm 139, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm terrible at quoting bits, but there's the Bible often talks about how our bodies are a temple, that they are the place where the Holy Spirit dwells within us. And are we taking care of that in the best way for it to be the dwelling place of the Holy Spirit? I know I don't always. I, quite regularly will have in and out moments of not caring for myself properly. And that is part of the journey, but just reminding yourself, this is who God says that I am, and that we are perfectly loved. And I read this morning that we're not perfect. None of us are perfect, but we are perfectly loved.
And we just want to just finish with a couple of things. So I think these quotes just to kind of sum up what it is we've been saying, and then I just want to share just something about another example of someone in the Bible, just to finish, about the importance of reaching out to others if you are struggling with depression or anxiety, and particularly if you're suffering in silence. But just a couple of quotes.
So I read this book recently. I think it's Frankie Bridge, who was in the Saturdays. And it's her talk about how she went through a mental health breakdown, and she ended up in a psychiatric hospital. And I just found that there was so much of it that I was able to go, yeah, I get that. And there were bits that I wanted to show to people to be like, look, it's not just me. There are other people that are going through these things. So if you're walking through mental health, if you want to understand mental health a bit better, obviously it's not written from a Christian religious point of view, but I actually found it really, really helpful to read that. And a couple of quotes that she says in the book. She said, sometimes just saying my thoughts out loud to someone else, crying and releasing it all just helps. Let the pain and fear out, don't keep it inside. She also said, when it feels too tiring, which it may do now, or may do in the future, remember asking someone to help you get back up or walk alongside you for a while you get your footing is the most powerful and important thing to do. And I would just like to say, I think so many times we can look at other people and be like, they've got it all together. They are totally sorted. And I would really hate, and I'm sure you're not, but I would really hate for you to look at us and be like, she's not dealing with, she's out of that. Her mental health looks like it's absolutely fine. That's not a problem for them anymore. They look like they're in a perfectly great place. That is not true. So don't look at other people's snapshots, this hour of us looking like we know what we're talking about, because it is still, for us, something that we have to come back to. my mental health over the last couple of weeks has been a bit up and down. But I think because of the journey that I've been on through the last 8 years of seasons of depression and seasons of not, it's not all been like that. But you learn bits along the way. And I think quite often it can be really easy to say, why is God allowing that to happen? Why is God allowing that to happen again? Why am I having to go through that again? But for me, it really helps to know that nothing we go through is wasted with God. So you might walk through anxiety or depression or suicidal thoughts or OCD or schizophrenia or anything. And as long as that stays shut up inside in secret, then, it's not helping you, it's not helping anybody else. Bring it out into the light, talk about it, learn from it, and then, how can you then walk alongside somebody else? It's not wasted. So of course I would have loved not to have gone through depression and any of that, but I think it has made me into a stronger, more empathic person now. But we most certainly do not have it all together. There are still days where I think I'd just like to press pause on life. Actually, I did say that, I think, when Carl was ill, there were days when I was like, I just want to press pause today and not bother. I'd quite like to just stay in bed with a Netflix series and not speak to anyone. And it's really important not to beat yourself up for having days when you feel like that. And just, it is what it is. And tomorrow might be the same or it might be different. But I'm going to shoot that arrow prayer. God, I feel really rubbish today and I don't want to bother doing anything. Help.
Yeah. And so, as we said right at the beginning, the most important thing you can do, if you are someone who is struggling with depression or think you might be, or maybe some anxiety, or maybe you're just feeling a bit low and a bit rubbish, and you just are feeling that kind of reality, we want to encourage you. Today is the day that you reach out to someone for the first time. And I want to ask a question: who is your Jonathan? Now, by that I mean a biblical example. King David. Incredible story. I love the story of David. I think he's absolutely brilliant. I'm sure many of you will know the story of David and Bathsheba, where David has this incredible low moment where he's on his own. He's not thinking straight. He's struggling with lots of different things. One of the main things he's struggling with in this particular scene is grief, although it's not spoken of, but we'll come to that in a second. And we know he has, in his moment of lowness, he does things that he then instantly regrets. And he has no accountability. He talks to nobody about it. He keeps it very secret and very hidden. And then there are Psalms where he's crying out to God. Now, a couple of chapters before we get to that story, David's closest friend, Jonathan, has died. And David trusted Jonathan with his life. He spoke to Jonathan all the time about everything. He was accountable to Jonathan, and they were really close, really good friends. And so the grief was part of what was going on for David and his mental health, but also he lost his Jonathan. He lost his person to talk to. Now, he didn't have a choice in that, but some of you are sitting here this evening watching this, and you have a choice. You have someone you can reach out to, and I want to ask you, who is that, and are you going to do it today, even this evening? Just phone somebody and say, do you know what, I'm struggling, and I know you can't do that face to face, and it's horrible at the moment, but really just want to encourage you to ask the question, who is your Jonathan, and to reach out to them today. And also, we both want you to know, more than anything, as an absolute truth, you are valued by God. You matter to God so much. And the fact that you're going through this is not a punishment. It's not a curse from God. It's not God trying to put this on you, but actually God wants to meet you in this. He wants to work with you in this. It's not about getting everything sorted and then going to Jesus. You go to Jesus with it now, and together you can work on it, because you matter to him. You are valuable to him. You are precious to him. And it's an absolute truth. Even if you're not feeling it or sensing it or believing it, it's an absolute truth. And all of us at Maycamp want you to know that. That's why we're doing all this stuff online. So you know your vision of God can become clearer, that you can see how valuable you are to him. So we hope that what we've shared is helpful in some way. Feel free to share the video with others if you've got others that you know are struggling with mental health. Do speak to your youth leaders if you need to, or reach out to anybody you feel you can. We really hope that the rest of Maycamp is a blessing to you. I know we're not in Plumpton, I know we're not under Canvas, and it's not quite the same as normal, but there's still some great stuff for you to check out. In about 45 minutes time, there's going to be a roundup of the day, just to remind you of things you might have missed if you missed them and can go back on, or just to remind you what's been going on. And then at 8 o'clock, there's a quiz for everybody to do, all on this YouTube channel. If you want to see the rest of the program for the rest of this evening and tomorrow, you can find that on maycamp.org/live. The links are everywhere, so you can find them. But yeah, just to let you know, we're praying for you, and we pray God's blessing. And you should pray now. Are you happy to pray? Yeah. You'll pray to finish?
For me?
Yeah, go for it. Let's pray.
Dear Lord Jesus, we just thank you for these young people who are tuning into Maycamp live this weekend. And we pray that even though we're not together in a physical sense, I thank you that we are able to be together via the wonders of technology, and that we are able to learn more about you and more about who you say we are. And I just lift anyone who is struggling with their mental health to you. I just pray that they would have a sense of you and just that deep knowledge that they are not facing this alone. They may feel like they are alone, but they are most definitely not alone, and that you haven't abandoned them, that you are walking through this storm with them. I just pray for a touch of your spirit in each of these young people's lives, and that they might have a sense of somebody that they're able to talk to or share with, and just that knowledge that they are not alone.
Amen. So grace and peace to you. Be kind to yourselves. We hope that we can see you in person next year at Maycamp, and enjoy the rest of this weekend.